Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. I remember the day vividly, the sky a dull gray, the air thick with the impending storm. The tap on the door was soft, almost hesitant. When I opened it, there stood Mrs. Thompson, our neighbor from 2 doors down. Her eyes darted nervously, her hands wringing the hem of her cardigan. "John," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you about something serious." I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. What's on your mind?" Once we were seated in the living room, she took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on her fidgeting fingers. "It's about your wife, Linda," she said, and my heart sank. I didn't want to say anything before. I thought it wasn't my place. But it's been eating at me, and I think you should know. I leaned forward, my interest piqued despite the dread building in my stomach. "What about Linda?" Mrs. Thompson hesitated, then blurted out, "I've seen my son, Mark, coming out of your bedroom. Several times, in fact, when you were supposed to be at work. They didn't see me, but I saw them." The room spun around me as her words sank in. Linda and Mark. It couldn't be. And yet, the pieces started to fall into place, the late nights, the whispered phone calls, the decline in intimacy. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "Are you sure, Mrs. Thompson? Are you absolutely sure?" "Yes," she replied, her voice firmer. "I'm so sorry, John. I thought you should know." Anger surged through me, hot and relentless. "Thank you for telling me," I managed through gritted teeth. I walked her to the door, my mind racing. After she left, I stormed up to the bedroom, my sanctuary now tainted with betrayal. I rifled through Linda's things until I found her phone. The call log and texts confirmed my worst fears, messages of love and plans to meet, all hidden behind my back. The fury built inside me like a wildfire. I wouldn't let this stand. I would confront Linda, yes, but more than that, I would make sure she regretted betraying me. Over the next few days, I crafted my plan meticulously. I documented everything, gathering evidence of her infidelity. I consulted a lawyer and set the wheels in motion for a divorce that would leave her with nothing. The day of reckoning came swiftly. Linda returned home to find me waiting, her phone with the damning messages laid out before me. "John, what's this?" she asked, her voice quavering. "It's over, Linda," I said coldly. "I know about you and Mark. And I want you out." Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "John, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain." I cut her off. "You've made your choice. Now live with it." The divorce was bitter and swift. I made sure the terms were as harsh as legally possible. When it was all said and done, Linda left town, shattered and alone. I had taken my revenge, but the taste of it was as ash in my mouth. As I stood in the empty house, now devoid of her presence, I knew life would never be the same. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil in my heart as I locked the door behind me, stepping out into the new, cold reality I had created. The morning after Linda's departure was eerie in its silence. The absence of her presence echoed through the empty rooms like a ghostly reminder of what had transpired. I sipped my coffee, staring blankly at the vacant chair across the table, when a knock at the door jolted me from my reverie. Opening the door, I was confronted by Mark, his eyes red-rimmed and accusing. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tense. "Fine," I replied curtly, stepping aside to let him in. "Let's talk." We sat at the kitchen table, the air thick with unsaid words. Mark was the first to break the silence. "Why did you have to destroy her?" he demanded, his fists clenched on the tabletop. "She loved you." "Loved me?" I scoffed, the bitterness lacing my words. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like betrayal. Mark's face contorted with frustration. It was a mistake, okay? We never meant for it to go this far. A mistake that happened repeatedly, right under my nose. I shot back, anger flaring. You've ruined everything, Mark. And for what? A fling. He looked away, shame etched on his features. I know I messed up. I'm here to apologize, not just to you but to my mom too. She's devastated about all this. Apologies won't fix what's been broken, I said coldly. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. After a long moment, Mark stood up. Whatever you're planning to do next, please consider the damage already done. There's no need to drag this out any further. I watched him leave, his shoulders slumped, a part of me felt vindicated, another part hollow. But this was far from over. The seeds of revenge had already been sown, and there was more to be done to ensure that my pain was not in vain. Later that day, I received a call from an unknown number. Answering it, I was greeted by the voice of a private investigator. Mr. Carter, I've found something you might want to see regarding your wife and Mr. Thompson. Go on, I prompted, my interest piqued. We've tracked down some financial anomalies. It seems your wife and Mr. Thompson had more going on than just an affair. There's a joint bank account with substantial transactions. Thought you should know. A joint account. The revelation was a new angle, one that reeked of deeper deceit. My revenge needed recalibration. Keep digging, I instructed the PI. I want to know everything. Every transaction, every lie. As I hung up the phone, the pieces of a darker puzzle began to fall into place. This wasn't just a simple affair, it was a calculated betrayal that perhaps ran deeper than I could have imagined. That evening, as I plotted my next moves, I knew one thing for certain: the fallout was just beginning, and I would stop at nothing to unearth the full extent of Linda's treachery. The storm had passed, but its aftermath was just starting to take shape. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. Armed with the information about the joint account, I delved deeper into Linda's financial history. Documents, bank statements, and late-night email trawls became my new norm. The truth, it seemed, was more convoluted than a simple affair. I was poring over bank statements when my phone buzzed, a message from the private investigator with a list of dates and locations tied to the joint account transactions. It appeared Linda and Mark had been more than careless. They were reckless. I decided to confront Mark again, this time with my new ammunition. I drove to his house, my mind racing with each mile that passed. As I pulled up, I saw him in the front yard, seemingly waiting for me. You again, Mark said as I approached, his voice weary. I've uncovered the bank account, I stated without preamble, watching his face for any flicker of guilt. You two were quite the team, weren't you? Mark's expression hardened. What do you want, John? I want to know everything. What was the money for? Why betray me like this? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We started off just talking, but then you started planning. Trips, hotels, gifts. It wasn't enough to take my wife, you had to drain my finances too. It wasn't like that, Mark protested, but the fight seemed to have drained out of him. Look, I'm sorry. Truly. What do you want from me now? Truth. All of it. Then we'll see if your apologies hold any weight. Our conversation was cut short by the arrival of Mark's mother. Mrs. Thompson's face was stricken as she approached. John, please, hasn't there been enough pain? I turned to her, the betrayal stinging anew. Pain? Yes, there's been plenty. But it wasn't me who started this. Please, let's find a way to move forward, she pleaded. Moving forward starts with understanding the past, I retorted, my gaze shifting between mother and son. I'll be in touch. Leaving their home, I felt a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. The pieces were coming together, but the picture they formed was uglier than I had anticipated. Back at home, I laid out all the evidence, the bank statements, the PI's reports, the photos. It was time to plan my next move. Legal avenues, public exposure, and personal confrontations, I considered them all. As I sat there, the weight of my decisions loomed large. Revenge had consumed me, driving every action, every thought. Yet, as I plotted the downfall of those who had wronged me, a nagging voice whispered, "Is this who you want to be?" Shaking off the doubt, I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer. "We need to tighten the screws. Can we meet tomorrow to discuss some creative legal strategies?" "Yes, of course, John. I'll clear my morning." The call ended, and I was alone again in the silence of my once happy home. The path was set, and I was too far down it to turn back now. Whatever the end, I was ready. Ready to strike back, ready to hurt them as they had hurt me. But as the night deepened and the shadows grew, the cost of my vendetta weighed heavily on me, the solitude a stark reminder of the price of retribution. The next few weeks were a chess match of strategic moves, each more calculated and decisive than the last. My plans unfolded with a cold precision, driven by the relentless engine of revenge. The final play was set for a brisk, cloud-covered morning. Mark had agreed to meet me, under the pretense of discussing a settlement, an olive branch that was anything but. We met at a secluded park, the autumn leaves swirling around us like whispers of the coming storm. "You said you wanted to settle this?" Mark asked tentatively as he approached. I nodded, my face a mask of faux amity. "Yes, Mark. It's time we put an end to all this." He looked relieved, unaware of the trap I had laid. "I appreciate that, John. I really do. We both know the real reason we're here, Mark," I said, cutting to the chase. "The money, the lies, everything. Today, it ends." Mark's face fell, the realization dawning on him. "John, whatever you're thinking." "I'm thinking it's time for payback," I interrupted, pulling out a stack of documents from my coat. "Here, proof of every transaction, every lie. It's over." Mark took a step back, panic rising in his eyes. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," I replied coldly. "You've already given me everything I needed. But there's one last thing you should know." From behind a nearby tree, my private investigator emerged, camera in hand. "We've been recording everything, Mark. Every meeting, every word today." Mark's face drained of color. "You set me up. Just like you set me up for the fall. But I'm not the one who's going to crash and burn." Leaving Mark to his shock, I made my way to Linda's new residence, a small apartment she had rented in the city. She opened the door, surprise etching her features at my appearance. "John. What are you?" "It's over, Linda," I said without preamble. "I know everything. And soon, everyone else will too." Linda's stance hardened, her initial surprise morphing into defiance. "You think you can scare me into submission?" "I'm not afraid of you, John." "Oh, you misunderstand," I replied, a cruel smirk playing on my lips. "I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to free us both." With that, I handed her an envelope. "Your share of the bank account. It's empty. I've donated every last cent to charity. In your name, of course." Her eyes widened, the implications dawning on her. "You can't." "I just did. And with the evidence of your fraud, well, let's just say your future looks rather bleak." Turning on my heel, I left her there, speechless and powerless. The game was over, and I had won. But as I walked away, the hollow victory rang in my ears. Months passed, and the dust settled. Mark faced criminal charges for embezzlement, his career and reputation in ruins. Linda, disgraced and financially gutted, moved away, her dreams shattered by her own deeds. As for me, I returned to my empty house, the echoes of the past reverberating through the silent halls. I had taken my revenge, ruthless and complete, but at what cost? The shadows of betrayal and vengeance lingered, companions in a life hollowed out by retribution. In the end, the price of my vendetta was my own soul, a cost too great for any victory. The final twist of the knife wasn't one I delivered, but one I inflicted upon myself.